How did Cormac McCarthy feel about Huner S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? Well, today we are going to hear from McCarthy himself about this topic. And I have connected two very interesting biographical details about McCarthy's loathing of modern literature and modern poetry. Because McCarthy has said time and time again that he doesn't like modern poetry or modern books. But there are two instances in his life where he got interested in the modern era's work, and both are connected to women. But before we get to that biographical detail, my name is Ian, and you only find deep dives like this on Cormac McCarthy here on Right Conscious. I already have over 150 videos on McCarthy in the playlist down below, and that number is growing daily. So subscribe if you are interested. And let me blow your minds about the McCarthy and young women connection. So, in the late 1980s and the early 1990s, Cormac McCarthy married a woman that was half his age. She was in her 20s and he was in his late 50s. And she was a reader and a writer, and so it seems like it was kind of a fangirl scenario where he met a very good-looking fan that was young, fell in love, and decided to marry her. But when you go to the archive and you hear him talk about this time and some of his interests, there is a renewal from her, or maybe not from her, but there is a renewal in modern work during that time. And I've talked about this before in my video titled Cormac McCarthy on Modern Literature. So in the 1990s, that happened because when you meet someone who is young and into reading, she's going to expose you to new things, especially if you don't have a phone or a television. Computers weren't invented, but were somewhat isolated from society in El Paso. But in 1974, Cormac McCarthy divorced his second wife, Annie Delisle, and moved to Tucson. And while he was here, he was having a rowdy time because I know this because I live in Tucson. And in his recent novel, The Passenger, he mentions Alicia working at a bar where a weird man named Jim Anderson branded you. So it was a famous bar and people would come all around the world and they would get branded by this guy. And he would, I think, brand his face on you. And she was working as like a bar back at this bar, which let me know that Cormac was, occupying bars like that. And why wouldn't he? Because Cormac in 1974, he leaves his wife and he's free. He has some money finally, he has some freedom, and he's kind of like a moody writer. Like imagine Cormac, who is very smart, got this Texas accent, and you're maybe a student at the U of A or at a bar, and you meet this guy who's published 3 novels already. Like that's crazy anyway. There's already booktubers and people who've never published anything who get clout with women just by acting smart or acting like they're writers. Like that does work. But he was the real deal. And when you go to the archive, McCarthy had this massive intellectual awakening at this time. He's studying Freemasonry and Carl Jung and the occult and just like the most random things. And because he had time finally after divorcing his wife to be able to kind of burrow down with these deeper interests, which also, was socializing. But if I had to guess, I don't think you know too many of Cormac McCarthy's influences and favorite novels. So I have assembled 144 of Cormac McCarthy's favorite books and authors in a list for free for you. And all you have to do is go down to the description below, click on the link, and get that document. And let me just say, as someone who has been reading from that list for years, there are so many great books in there. There was also a renewal in spirituality because earlier in his life, most likely after his tenure in the Air Force, McCarthy took LSD. And from what he said, I have a video on this on the channel also. He talked about how LSD kind of opened his mind to the, potential experiences, which, is very typical. But he had the freedom again to be able to live life. But in 1971, a man named Huner S. Thompson published Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And McCarthy said about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas when asked, when talking about modern literature, he said, most of it sucks, but Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is a classic of our time. And that is a huge statement by McCarthy because when you look at McCarthy's work and what he does, especially before like No Country for Old Men, it was very serious. Like the whole Border trilogy is tragic. Like all his works are so sad. And No Country for Old Men and The Passenger and a lot of his later screenplays, things got a little bit more fun. And then when you got to see his personality, you're like, okay, this guy's a jokester. Like he really kind of got sucked into the sad boy, tragic, existentialist stuff for a while. But he does come across as a very social person, and people that know him say he's very fun. And so Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas makes sense for him because, first of all, he was into that traveling and experimental culture. It also takes place in the desert, which, where he was living, which I think kind of had a profound impact on him because desert novels are kind of hard to come by, especially back in 1971. But Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas also mirrors McCarthy's favorite theme all throughout his life, which is a cultural critique, which, states that the American dream isn't really true. And through the failures and hypocrisies of American society that are shown in Fear and Loathing, we see a loss of ideals, searching just through a sea of superficial meaning, in a direct access to moral decay. And something else that McCarthy didn't let out until The Passenger was his humor. If you look all throughout The Passenger, there are the most corny jokes ever. But he started writing it in 1960. You get a lot of this in Suttree too. Like, he really is into humor. Suttree is one of the more humorous novels I've ever read. But Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is just like endless quacks and absurdity. And I think this was impactful for McCarthy for many different reasons, but it was a combination of all these things, but it was also a memento to the declining culture of the 1960s. And McCarthy, who did participate in it, he did live in San Francisco in the mid 1950s. He never really got to experience it out in the middle of his stone house without running water in Tennessee, being a married man. And McCarthy also does some things very similar to the novel, one of them being kind of postmodernism and creating a disjointed narrative. The Orchard Keeper is a recollection of a memory. Outer Dark is literally a nightmare. Child of God is a necrophiliac. McCarthy is a postmodernist. And if you want to understand Cormac McCarthy at a deeper level, I have a Cormac McCarthy course and a Cormac McCarthy book club, among many other book clubs that are currently active and running. And I would love to talk about Cormac McCarthy or some of your other favorite authors every single day in my daily office hours, the book club calls, in our writing group. There is so much over there to check out. So the link is down in the description below if you are interested. And I'll see you guys over there or back in this video. And we look at with a lot of his italicized scenes and what he was working on, especially like in The Passenger back then, you could tell that he was really trying to break form and innovate. So when you look at these things, they give you motivation, even if they seem silly. He calls it a classic of our time because it is. It really does capture this feeling. And Cornelius Suttree is very similar to Duke because he is an active participant. Like, he is there. Suttree is in Knoxville, but he's a detached observer. Duke is mostly, that's because of drugs, and McCarthy's lack of interiority, but both have this kind of weird detachment while still engaging in the party. And interesting enough, McCarthy at this time was finishing Suttree, which was published in 1979. And so when he probably came across Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, it could have been inspirational for that work, which was about debauchery and moral decay and the decline of the American dream and all these other things. One could also say that he could have been studying for Blood Meridian, because I take a very spiritual approach, and most scholars and people I know who've read it enough also do, that after the kid and Captain White go down into Sonora, there is a change of pace. There is almost, McCarthy starts describing the blood red sun and like the false moon and these types of things. They almost move into this different world. And I think that's a pretty good reading of the novel. But in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Thompson, to much less of an aesthetic effect, is also describing the desert in a hallucinatory way. And so I want to hear from you guys now. What are your thoughts on Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? I know that David Foster Wallace really didn't like the novel, but I would give it a strong 7, a light 8 maybe, in terms of like it being a novel. And I would agree that it is a classic of our time. And obviously Johnny Depp really kind of cemented that with the movie.